The benefits of moving to the cloud have been proven again and again. The question now isn't why to make the move, it's how do we get there? Microsoft knows migration isn't easy, but Azure Migrate is here to simplify things. Azure Migrate is your central hub for cloud migration projects. It allows you to manage every aspect of the discovery, assessment, and migration process. Track and manage migration efforts end-to-end, all in the Azure portal. Take advantage of migration support from your whole environment, including Windows and Linux servers, databases, web apps, and more. Choose the right tools for your needs, from the native Azure migration tools to partner tools integrated with the Azure Migrate Hub. Migrate at your own pace with the guided, step-by-step experience of Azure Migrate. Choose a discovery tool to build an assessment. Discover and understand everything you need to know about your on-premises environment. Assess machines at scale. Get the computing power you need from the cloud. Nothing more, nothing less. Calculate cost savings from migrating. Select a migration tool to move your workloads to the cloud. Automatically apply insights from your assessment to your migration. Cut over in seconds with minimal application downtime. Continue to optimize post-migration. And on top of all of this, Azure Migrate gives you an agentless experience, reducing complexity and helping you make the most of your investment in the cloud. Moving to the cloud is a big deal, but it doesn't have to be a big headache. Try Azure Migrate today, and let us help simplify your journey to the cloud.
Hey everybody, it's your buddy Jay. Welcome back to this is, I think, episode 22 of AzureFunBytes. I've been doing this so much for you, not for me, for you, so that every week we get together, we learn a little bit something about Azure, we try to have a good conversation with our guest, and somewhere along the line, I think we come together and we figure out something new. So as always, we've got the chat. Feel free. Well, we've got someone already saying hi. We'll say hi there. And in a second, I'm going to bring in our guest. But I want our guest to kind of tell us a story first about something you can do before I even have him on. So here you go.
How do I migrate my Mongo database into Cosmos DB? So MongoDB is a very popular database, and it is a document-based database. It is very, very popular these days. But if you want to run that on Azure, we have the possibility to create a Cosmos DB account and then to put this data into Cosmos DB. Now, Cosmos DB offers large number of APIs, and one of those APIs is Mongo APIs. What it means is that even though the storage is in Cosmos DB, you can use the MongoDB APIs to access your data. And so basically you don't need to change your application, which is super convenient. Now for the migration itself, we have two ways to do that. One way is simply to use a Mongo tool. So we have MongoDump, Mongo Restore, and so what you would do is just log into your virtual machine hosting the MongoDB using SSH, for example, and then you can do the migration using MongoDump, and then later you do a Mongo Restore into Cosmos DB. That works great. But we have another solution which is even more flexible, I would say. This is a database migration service. So this is something that you create on Azure. It's an Azure resource, and then you select as a source your MongoDB virtual machine or your MongoDB database. The target would be the Cosmos DB. And the nice thing with the DMS, with the database migration service, is that we also perform the migration online. So you don't have to switch your web application or your website off during the migration time. The migration is performed, the migration service keeps everything synchronized, and then when you are done and ready, you can basically connect to your new data, make sure that everything's fine, switch the connection string into your application, and then you're good to go. So basically two ways to do that, either using the native Mongo tools, which are totally supported, or you can use the Azure Database Migration Service.
And that brings our guest to here. Right on the show is Laurent Pognon. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today. We learned a lot already from you.
I'm laughing because, first of all, hello everyone. Thank you so much, Jay, for having me. And I'm laughing because this video reminds me of past times. It was actually shot during one of our Cloud Advocate Summit. Do you remember that summit where it
I
snowed so
did.
much? And
Yes,
we
I
had
actually did like one or two of those videos too. So I
yeah.
mean, I know exactly where we were and when.
Yeah, we had to postpone the shooting because it was so much. There was so much snow that the other people couldn't go to the campus, and it was But those were good times. And basically, I was listening to what I said, and it's still true. So that's a good thing. The database migration service is still very much supported, but there is so much more to migration. So I hope we can talk about that during this hour.
Yeah, I think that that's what our big goal is. We're gonna tack on a lot of information relating not just to these like services, but migrations in general. So
Yeah.
I worked in operations and engineering for a very long time prior to being an advocate. Like you did something prior to being an advocate as well, and
Yes.
obviously the big part of it is I think what we say is not all apps that you use are born in the cloud. But
Correct.
some of them end up moving there. And so it's up to you to kind of make decisions on what exactly it is the best migration route for you. And so like just to kind of get started, there's lots of tools, obviously. You know, there's thoughts about why and the kind of big picture stuff like, well, you know, Azure gives you all these benefits with security, uptime, reliability, you know, products as a service. But like the initial introduction and getting everything there, that's some work that I think people underestimate.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it's important for people to realize that a migration has different phases. And the first phase is really about understanding what you're going to do. And it's about not even touching what's running, not even really doing anything, but it's really an assessment. It's really just like checking out, what do I have? And is it going to be able to run on the cloud? Also important questions like how much is it going to cost me? Because we need to remember that this is a totally different economy, right? We have an on-premise economy, which is if I need a new server, I'm going to have the money to buy that server, right? And,
Yes.
and I need to totally estimate how much this server should support in terms of capacity and all that. And this is hard because you need to think in advance. While in the cloud, we have a totally different economy where we are paying as we go. And if I need a new server, it's as easy as saying, okay, I'm going to scale. And then I have a new server. And if I don't need that server anymore, then I'm just going to say, okay, I don't need it anymore. And then I'm not paying for that anymore. Which, of course, it sounds great, right? But it also makes things a lot more difficult to estimate because instead of estimating just once for the servers that you're going to have, you need to constantly estimate again and again, like how much am I going to spend next month, how much, etc. And am I going to make enough money to compensate? So there are definitely those phases that are important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so now I want to bring up something that people kind of need to talk about. And there's these strategies. Like, what does a migration actually look like when you get to work? And so we've got these strategies of like, you know, you have to define what exactly it is you want to do. And so this is from some of the documentation on the Azure website. I will share it in the notes for today. But one of the great things that, you know, it gives you are all these guides. Like one, deciding on what your modernization approach is. And you and I did some of this around the Ignite tour where we talked to people about, you know, do you lift and shift? Do you do a complete net new? Do you refactor everything? Do you rebuild? It's just a big decision. So that's where this like holistic migration plan kind of comes into place. And so that's what's really nice is that there's a lot of different tools on here, and I really like this readiness assessment.
Yeah.
Because it really gives people a little bit of an idea using this tool and says, you know what, these are the things that we think you need in order to prepare your application to move. Is your app ready?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a good thing for you and me, you and I to kind of start talking about before we even like dig into anything.
Yeah,
you know,
that sounds good,
some apps are born in the cloud, some are not.
Correct.
And the apps that are not born in the cloud, we like to call them what, legacy at this point?
I don't like to talk about legacy because in the end we are going to have a situation where, I mean, as long as the app is running and makes money, it's not legacy to me, right? It's it's a production app, period, right? So I like to talk about on-premise applications versus in the cloud applications, these kind of things, and being very aware that no application is ever completely in the cloud or completely in premise, right? It's always a hybrid solution. With everything, with all the complications that it brings, but also one thing that we say, which is really interesting, and that's our colleague, in fact, Sarah Lean, who is based in Glasgow, who is an engineer who does a lot of migration, keeps saying really start by migrating, by assessing, and then migrating with one of your least critical workloads, right? The thing that the business doesn't rely on, because you're learning a lot of things. You're learning, first of all, is my application ready? How do I even find out if it's ready? Then you're going to learn about doing the migration itself. You're going to learn about how do I configure and take advantage of all the services, because that's one of the big points of the cloud, is that you have all those services which are running around your application. Your application is there, but then you can monitor it. You can add some, do some cost management. You can add some security. You can add services, even in terms of, for example, AI, artificial intelligence, serverless, and all that. So you can build a whole ecosystem around it, right? So you need to learn how to do that. And if you do that, you're going to make mistakes, right, at some point. And so if you do that with your most critical workload, then it's definitely not a good idea. So definitely make sure to assess, first of all, what do you want to migrate first?
Of course, then, absolutely.
Yeah, and then after that, there are really those phases that you want to go through. And for the assessment itself, you have different tools. And I'm more of a developer than an IT pro person. So I was very interested in checking out if I have a web application, for example, and I'm more of a .NET person, so I was checking that. But we also have, of course, migration services for other things. How am I going to proceed to bring this application to the cloud and data to the cloud?
Yeah, and so what we've kind of learned, and I guess that's what we're talking about. What should get migrated? What shouldn't get migrated? These are the things that I think we kind of talk about when we get into the whole migration story, because every migration is a story. And I really believe that. Like you walk into that story and you say to myself, how exactly are we going to get from point A to point B with this application in a new place? And that's a very difficult decision to make. And sometimes it comes with, I like to say, if you want to make change, you better wear a helmet. And migrations are an absolute helmet, required thing, because you're going to obviously go through the ups and downs associated with that kind of work. You're going to see things sometimes go in your favor. You're going to learn about capacity needs. And this is what I think was a big thing we talk about with like lift and shift. Yeah. Lift and shift, you can't take exactly what you had in the data center and bring it over. It's not going to work out in your favor financially. Where the application could work great, but you're going to look at those first few months' bills and you're going to say to yourself, wow, what did we do? Yeah. And that's an important skill to take on, is not only just factoring why we're putting this in the cloud, but how are we going to make it efficient when we're in the cloud? And so I think that's some of the things that we look at. And so traditionally, we talked about this. Some applications, and we worked with one, in the Tailwind Traders world, when we were doing things at the Ignite Tour. And I'd really love to bring up some of that content if I could. I'll have to go through something to find it. But one of the things we learned in like the Ignite Tour back in like 2019 is people want to learn how to do these migrations. We learned that really well because we did a bunch of like migration talks and they all made sense to people. So now I think what we can do is talk about the different tools people can use to do that. And so I'm going to bring up one. and we'll take a look at it for a few minutes, and then we'll kind of talk about your thoughts on it. So give me 1 sec. Let me bring up the portal. Here we go. And so the thing that I wanted to kind of bring into us today is Azure Migrate. I think it's something that we brought up in the beginning at the top of the show. It's an important tool because, like I said, migration tools are just really useful at this point. It's an important tool that we can use to migrate on-premises data center elements over to Azure resources. And so there's a number of different ones. And so I know the one thing I want to just take a quick look at too is this assess and migrate. And so we don't have something to work with right now, but I'm going to just kind of play through this. And so we're going to do what we do with every Azure thing. We're going to build a resource group for it. So I'm just going to call it J, AFB, AzureFunBytes. Okay. We can give it a name. It's just a naming convention. And we'll just call it J, AFB. Our geography of where where around the world our project is going to be hosted.
Azure Migrate, for people who are familiar with Azure, we maybe can explain that the Azure Migrate project that you created, it is not really an Azure resource like other Azure resource that we have where we need to define a region because it's going to run on the data center. Think about it a little bit like a meta resource, if you want. This is a place. This is a portfolio where you're going to gather a lot of assessment, a lot of reports, a lot of things like that. It's neatly in one place, but essentially it's just going to cost you storage, right? And so when we chose here the geography, you notice probably that it was not saying region. It was saying Europe, for example. It was not saying, Western Europe or Northern Europe or whatever. So that's what's going on here.
So I see so I guess if we're working with our virtual machine. So if we go to assess, we've got this assessment tool. We can go to discover, and now we have pre-existing things that are virtualized, and then physical and others. So if we want to take this from straight Zen, if you have a straight Zen image, or if you want to come from another provider and you want to export their image style, great. If you're an existing Windows Hyper-V user, this is going to be really easy for you. You know how to create your snapshots, hopefully. And then those are going to be able to be brought over and is a part of your Azure resources. And you can see, essentially, you create a key, you download the appliance, you start this appliance, and then you run some discovery on your remote resources on that network. It figures out what exactly it is you want to bring over and does so. And so let's talk a little bit about next is SQL and other databases. So
here in Azure Migrate, you have the possibility to migrate different types of resources. So virtual machines, like you said, are one. Databases are another one. And here we are talking about SQL databases, right? We can also migrate Cosmos databases using so basically Mongo, like NoSQL, etc., using the database migration service. We have VDI, which is a virtual desktop. So this is also something that you can migrate. Web applications, which is basically moving things like ASP.NET, Node.js applications, these kind of things, PHP apps. And then we have Databox, which is kind of a special type of migration. This is a type where you actually migrate to a physical storage media, which can be huge, which can be like petabytes big. And then after that, you ship that back to the data center, and our engineers are then going to put this data in Azure. So it is for example, sensitive data that you don't want to transmit over the internet, or if you have some huge quantities of data that you want to take. So these are kind of the 5 different objects, if you want, that you can migrate.
So this is what we would call a big migration. That's what's kind of going on here. So let's imagine there's a situation
mostly
where
you don't do all that, right? Mostly, like for me, I will do a web app and a database. Most probably, I don't do the server migration, for example.
But let's say though you are working with some huge amounts of massive data that eventually you want to use some of the AI services on Azure, and you don't necessarily want to make a hybrid connection between your two networks. Maybe that's not within your best interest right now. Maybe it's just something you don't want to do.
Maybe you just don't want to because it's too slow, or maybe because it's insecure, or there are all kinds of reasons. Yeah.
And because of that, you may say, you know what, let's take tons and tons of data. Let's stick it in a giant hard drive, and someone will pick it up and mail it and bring it to the data center. And because those data centers are all over the world, you basically get these either a big old 100 terabyte or an 8 terabyte SSD. Here's the heavy where it's a petabyte.
On wheels. And those are really fun because they have they actually have a label which is e-ink, like a Kindle. So they are shipped to you. When you're done, you press a button, it will change the label to go back to the user, and it's kind of fun. But that's the migration itself already. And before we go into that, if I may, I'd love to show you a slide about if I may share my screen. Because those slides have been prepared by, like I said, by Sarah Lean, who is our colleague. And she really knows what she talks about. So I can't resist showing that. Because one thing which is super important when you do the discovery and assessment phase is that there are really a few things that you need to think about, right? First of all, this phase is super important. This is really, and that's why we are spending quite a lot of time on it, right? It's really the key to the success of your migration. If you don't do it, you're going to fail. If you do it badly, you're probably going to fail. This is a phase where you check what is your application made of? And we already touched about that. Like, is it just an app service or a web application? Is it going to have databases? Is it going to have maybe services which cannot be migrated, which have to stay on premises, in which case suddenly you're in a hybrid solution, et cetera, et cetera. And one really, really important thing is the staff training, because you need to train your staff. This is, I kind of pointed at that in the beginning. It's a different economy, but it's not just a different economy, right? Their role is going to change. If you move an application from, from an IIS server running on Windows or a Linux server, and then you have people maintaining that, and you move that to an app service, to a platform as a service in the cloud, then suddenly their role is going to shift, right? Because they are not maintaining the server anymore, or at least not as much. They are more about configuring the server and optimizing the server and checking performance and optimizing performance and these kind of things. So it can be a very exciting phase for the staff. I really believe that. But you need to be straightforward with them and tell them, look, because, people are sometimes afraid of change, right? And so you need to tell them, look, we are going to do something which is really exciting, but at the same time, this is also really scary. So, bear with us. We're a team, and we are going to pull through that. And in the end, we are going to reap the benefits of that. So it's important to let them know that. End users are probably going to notice differences, even if in an ideal solution they won't. But let's face it, they probably will at some point, right? So it might be also a good idea to tell them, well, okay, things are changing a little bit, or this is what we are going to do. We can do quite a lot of migrations with minimal downtime, I would say, or, even in best scenarios, no downtime. But there might be at some point a downtime. So maybe you want to inform them, etc., and let them know what's going on. And also document everything you do, because this is a critical phase. Later, you need to be able to go back, learn from your mistakes.
That's a general rule.
That's a general rule. That is true, yeah, because you need to be able to go back and check what did we do. Especially if you do a rolled migration, right, which is what we recommend anyway. You start with the least critical workload, you migrate it, and then you go back and you check, okay, what did we do and what worked and what didn't, right? So you need to have traces about that. So this is interesting. And also another thing that you do during the assessment is the money, because, if you want to migrate, often it has some financial reasons, right? It's one of the many reasons why people migrate. And so it can be interesting to know now, how do I pay? Not just how much does it cost, but also how do I pay my bills? Like, do I pay upfront? Do I pay at the end of the month? And is it a big amount every year or whatever? Because on Azure, it's going to probably be different. On Azure, you're going to be billed monthly, all right? And that can be interesting to check how it works out. And we have tools for that. For example, the TCO, what we call the total cost of ownership, which is going to help you to do some scenarios to say, okay, this is what I have now. And then it's going to evaluate for you how much is it going to cost in the cloud, and then you can create reports around that. So I thought those two slides were probably interesting to check out in the assessment phase, right?
Yep, I want to bring up something myself.
Sure.
Just put up Let me stop my screen. And like, I have something we actually like put together a couple years ago together, and I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of share this. Also, just like modernization reasons. I just want to pull this up so you can see it. And I think that really helps. Like, why do we modernize? And let's start there. First of all, we modernize for cost reduction. A lot of the decisions that we make in migration start when we modernize applications. We want to think about how do we make these things cheaper. Period. It's a natural need in almost any business that looks at what their IT costs are. How can we reduce costs but still get the benefits of what we're moving to? And so then
it's often a trigger also. It's often what is really starting the whole, because who is going to trigger the idea of the migration is probably going to be, one of the execs in your firm, right? The CEO, the CTO, maybe somebody who's higher up, and they are probably going to talk about cost. Yeah.
And I think this is a big one for people like myself and yourself. Managed services. These are the things that take us into a place where we don't necessarily have to be overly concerned about the things in the underneath that we had to spend all that time with in data centers and other distribution methods, like going and just putting it on a VM. So let's even talk about that. Like,
actually, it's funny because we came from very different backgrounds, right? So I was an application developer before I came to Azure, and interestingly, for me, moving to Azure meant that instead of having to worry less about infrastructure, suddenly I have to worry more about infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Because I never did before. I had people like you, right, who were taking care of that for me. And I was telling them, this is my application, please deploy it, make it run, right? Well, now on Azure, and that's the really cool thing for developers like me, is that suddenly we have, again, right, it's a different role, but it's a really great role, is that suddenly I know I can go and check how is my application service running? How is my server running? Can I optimize it? Can I get easily some logs and some monitoring information about what's going on in my server performance? How can I, go and check the performance optimization? Before, if I wanted to do that as an application developer, I had to go and ask the IT pro guy to give me the logs, to give me the stats, to give me the metrics, etc. Well, now I really have the possibility to go and do it myself. So it's interesting that we see our two roles, which were, sometimes we see this big wall of incomprehension, right, between the IT pro and the devs, and this is bad, right? We want to avoid that. But basically, by bringing everybody together, we also make the communication easier.
That's interesting, because aside from, I just want to say, not to interrupt, but aside from managed services and elastic scale that comes from them, is this, which I think is a big part, is the team skill set. When you move to a different, more modern hosting platform, one of the big things that you're telling your team is that we're willing to take on this and teach you how to do it. Your educational needs are completely aligned with your migration process. If your team doesn't know how to use the tools to move them to new places, then you're going to be stuck in situations where you could very well not have a successful migration. You could end up being stuck in. So I want to kind of bring up something else from this, because I think it really helps also kind of understand.
But really, while you bring that up, right, I want to point out and really stress out that this is an opportunity for your team. And I know it sounds super optimistic and everything, right? But it's really an opportunity for your team to come together in a very different manner and to suddenly understand each other way better. Because for me as a dev, I understand now, security aspects way better than I ever did before, or performance aspects, or scaling aspects, or these kind of things. Because before I didn't really have to worry about it, but now it also makes me a better developer to know that, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you go through it, and migrations are tough. Period. Yeah. They're not easy, and everyone's had an application or two if they've worked in either as a developer and I should say in the past, in the bad old days, where there was things felt like a Jenga piece, like a puzzle. Everything was kind of held together, and you were worried that during a migration, if you pulled the wrong portion of that Jenga, it would all come crashing down. And so it kind of leads to like a really good thing of where we always talk about when we like the big migration ideas that we're going to try to talk about. And then I think we can get a little bit more into the weeds and maybe take a look at some of the tools. I think it's cool going over these concepts, but like this is a big one that I think happens to a lot of companies nowadays. They look at situations of what their existing application looks like, and they say, you know what? Let's start from scratch. Let's build an application that we know is going to work with serverless or Kubernetes, or maybe even a logic app that reduces like a larger amount of code. So maybe something that we used to like scan social media and then send out notifications to people based on like a big thing going on. You could use a logic app and not have to write any code to do that. So I think like we're thinking about simple functions that we can move and migrate and modernize at the same process. But then we get into these situations where we really can't do that. And so now we're talking about refactoring. So repackaging the application, not really making major code changes. And I think that a lot of people like to think about this in the context of Docker. That's like one of the best ways to think about that.
I guess, I mean, there are obviously other ways to do that, but Docker is definitely a big one,
Because when you're starting to talk about anything in a container, and Docker isn't container, containers aren't Dockers, they're just, Docker's a good way of doing it, but Docker and containers are about repackaging how your software is built. It's not about, a different way of virtualizing, because containers and all that aren't virtualization. It's a completely different process.
Right.
So this allows
it's really about, I mean, one of the advantage of containerizing is really that you can run things on your machine. You can make sure that it works. And once it works, the probability, I would say, that it's going to work in exactly the same manner on the server is very, very high. Right.
And that's why this repackaging into a Docker image with a something that will always work the same way every single time. So then you can start doing maybe distribution of that image in certain ways where if you load balance it across a number of resources, it makes sense. But let's talk about the last one in this, or I should say the next one in this. It's re-architecting. And that's kind of re-architecting is like modernizing your code. Doing things like you're breaking monoliths that you might have had into microservices. So it's taking your existing code base, and kind of just putting it into more cloud native tools rather than making your application completely cloud native.
And I think the fact of the matter is probably that at the end you're going to do a composite of all three, right? Depending on your application, just like most applications are hybrid, and you're going to end up with some things running on your own premises and some things running in the cloud. Similarly, when you have a big application with multiple components, I mean, a lot of those components, a lot of those parts are going to be quite old, right? And going into that and breaking it into pieces, that can be super scary, right? So maybe you want to ask yourself, okay, do I want to actually tackle that? But on the other hand, if you decide to re-architect, which is a fairly big endeavor, you're going to end up with a way better application, right? So it can be also a good trigger to do things like, well, if you have a .NET application, for example, a classic .NET application, maybe move it to .NET Core, and then suddenly you have the possibility to run on Linux, for example. Why not, right?
If Linux, containers, everything gets a little bit easier as you modernize.
And we really need to remember that we have so many really very old applications running, right? I mean, I had people come to me at Ignite Tour that you mentioned a few times, right? Which were really when we were still going and meeting people in person. They were coming to me and telling me, well, I have an Access database. I want to migrate to the cloud, for example. How do I do that? And then I had even one man who came and said, well, okay, I have this ASP application that is running, and I say, okay, so for ASP.NET, you're going to do no, an ASP application, not ASP.NET, right? That was old already when I started coding, right? So it was really it's a fairly old environment, but there is a solution for everything, which sometimes will include or involve rewriting parts of your application, sometimes involve migrating parts and then optimizing the way that you access them. And sometimes you can maybe even containerize it. And I mean, if really nothing works, you can always do a VM, right? I would
Sure,
say.
and that's kind of like the thing we're going to talk about last as far as the migration methods is lift and shift. And this is kind of like the age-old cloud way of doing things.
Sure.
It's not necessarily the best, but
well, I mean,
it gives
there are scenarios
people
for everything. There are reasons for everything, I would say. It's one of the ways, yeah.
Yeah, just it's a path of least resistance in your migration plan, because essentially you're saying, let's try to do one-to-one as much as we can. I'm sure we'll save a little bit money on the data center costs because we're not going to be doing all the worries about power and all that. But, we're not going to get all the full benefits of the cloud. So what we need to do is just get our app there and then begin the process of modernization after.
Yeah, it can be a great first step, definitely.
So let's kind of wrap up this, and we'll just talk about what a lot of people need to do when they make that move. So they need to assess the needs of what they're going to, virtualize or containerize, whatever's coming over. And then after that, we need a plan to copy this application or whatever these set of services that we need to move over. And then finally, we need to find a way to flip the switch. And those are like that's the general migration idea, is that you make these kind of plans to go step by step to modernize your app. And as long as you kind of, keep these things in perspective of how we assess, plan, execute, and then finalize.
Yeah.
It all just makes sense. So anyway, we've gone through the concepts.
Yeah.
And we talked just a smidge about Azure Migrate. And so I know you have some experience with it, and I'd just really love to hear a little bit about what you've used it for and how our viewers can kind of get started with it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can also share a few things. So I did. So we have some videos and all kinds of things that we could show, but it doesn't play so well. So what I would like to show is actually I did some screenshots which can show you a little bit the phase of a migration to, if my photo viewer actually worked, which it doesn't.
I pulled it down and I figured I'd give you a second.
I know, I saw that. Yeah, good move, because right now, now it seems to be working again. All right, cool. So hopefully it will stay this way. All right, so those are a screenshot from an actual migration of a web application. And here you see that this is Azure Migrate. So this is exactly the same Azure Migrate that you had before, right? Before you were showing, all right, I'm going to create here a migration project for a virtual machine. And here we are doing the same, but this time for a web application. And this is one of those cases where you have a big application with multiple components, and you're going to migrate those components gradually, okay, one after the other. So here we have created a new project, a new Azure Migrate project. We said, all right, this is for a web application. And you see that, again, we have here this assessment tool. So again, we have those phases, assessment versus migration. The assessment tool in that case for an app service is going to be what we call the app service migration assistant, which is a very clever name, I guess, or at least self-describing. And one thing which is interesting with that tool is that if you go to appmigration.microsoft.com, and if you have a public-facing website, you can actually enter the URL in the tool, click Access, and really in seconds, you're going to find out a few things about your application. Like, am I already from the start going to have some issues? Do I need to think about it? Or is it just going to run? And in many cases, it's really just going to run. So this is one thing that you can do. Now, this is not the assessment tool. It's just like a preview of what is coming, right? And then once you're done, you can actually download the App Service Assistant, the App Service Migration Assistant, which is an application that you're going to run on the same machine, or probably on the same machine where your application is actually running. And again, two phases. The first phase here is doing an assessment report. So you are going to say, all right, I want to point that to my local host, for example, my local web server, and it's going to run. And here we see that we have an error. And what it means is, again, I didn't touch anything in production, right? I'm just checking things out. It's going to tell me, well, okay, in that case, your application pool identity, which is something that is running on IIS, basically it's the way that your application is getting an identity, is not going to run in that manner on Azure, because here it is going to use a local system. And of course, on Azure, you don't have access to the local system because you're running in a virtualized environment, which is okay.
You're not using like a straight installation of IIS.
Exactly. This is something, I mean, under the cover, you have IIS, but you don't manage it yourself. That's one of the beauty of platform as a service, of course, is that you don't have to actually worry about those things. So here, click on learn more, and then it's just going to tell you exactly what you need to do to fix that. In that case, it was relatively easy, but maybe you're going to have more issues, and then you can really step by step go through them. So this is really the preparation phase. And when you're done, the cool thing is that this assessment report, because we told you need to document everything, right? You can actually log into Azure from the tool. You're going to upload this assessment report inside the tool. So here you're going to say, all right, I want to, to save that to this Migrate project. And then like this, you have everything in one location, which makes it super easy to go back later when you want to migrate the next workload and to see, what did we do when we had this error? Well, everything is documented. So that's the beauty of it. After that, if you want to actually, so here we see the Azure Migrate portal after the assessment has been done. And as you can see, the next step is saying, let's start the migration using the app service migration. So in that case, it's the same tool. In the case of the databases, for example, it could be a different tool. It depends on your scenario, but you are really guided step by step. And then after that, inside the tool here, you can do the migration itself. So directly here, you can actually say, all right, I'm going to create a new app service, or I'm going to use an app service which is already existing, depending what you want to do. And eventually do the migration itself, which is, so in that case, it is a code migration. It's not a Docker migration. You didn't containerize first, but it can be an interesting step when you have a website which is, I would say, reasonably complex. You can actually create an app service, copy it there, and then after that, you have to just configure a few connection string, and you're pretty much ready to go, which is really the case of many of the websites we have out there, right?
Yes. So what I really like is that so we're getting a little bit of echo.
From me? 1 2 1 2? Yeah. All right. I'm not sure what's going on. I didn't change anything.
Me.
Okay.
Let me see. Yeah, I think it's your. There we go. Yeah, sometimes it's, my microphone is just echoing into you when you have your. No big deal. There we go.
No problem.
Anyway, what I really like is a step-by-step kind of click-through process that really makes this easier for everybody to use, because we love this whole like next last kind of way of the cloud, but the ability to also to use CLI tools, APIs to execute a lot of the things. But this, I guess, you're talking about maybe day one users, this kind of tooling really helps them get comfortable and know.
Yeah, and also what you said before is important to know. So is that at any point you can actually use also third-party tools, right? Because there are tons of third-party tools that are going to help you. And I think really our policy has always been to encourage people to use whatever they are comfortable with, right? So Absolutely. When you do a data migration, for example, if you want to use native tools because that's what you know and love, then this is fine, right? We are proposing you some tools, but we are never imposing you the tools. And this is really important to know because there is really an ecosystem of hundreds and hundreds of migration tools that you can use to do what you want. So this is really good to know, yeah.
So let's play around with this a bit. I'm going to bring something up. We talked about this website. So let's bring up the Migrate to Azure. Let me just do this. I've got my kind of crappy WordPress. It's on Azure, but let's let it do the assessment. Why not, right?
So usually when things are already on Azure, it plays out pretty well, as you can see.
But then it's just interesting to see the different hosting models. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what this tool was and how it works. And I think that it's just really interesting. So we get the framework, which is, of course, it's Express PHP. It's all part of, what's it called?
Of WordPress.
WordPress. And then it's interesting because it actually shows my previous hosting, all the different types. Like, I worked at DigitalOcean years ago. I used AWS a lot. I did some stuff with some dedicated servers. And now, of course, I
you
work
can
at
hide,
WordPress.
right?
Yeah. And then it's also, this is great because now we can actually see the history of what I've used as well. Of like Nginx, Apache 2. So now I'm currently using Apache 2 still. So I like that this tool gives you kind of like a real kind of assessment of what it is. Like, hey, let's
and it's really super quick, right? I mean, it's really a matter of seconds. It helps you to why not?
Hey, Walmart is one of our biggest customers, and so it'll be really interesting just to see what. And so I think this is why this tool rules, because you can look at anything, and these green give you an idea that you can do this. And so we just look at Walmart. You can see all these types of different stuff. Obviously, this Akamai and CenturyLink. This is all, or it's just the Akamai is about probably their front end CDN. But then you kind of see all this different stuff about where they were and where they're. So they're probably well distributed all over the world. And it's just kind of neat to be able to.
No, it's good to know. And again, we're not even. I mean, this is really like the first step of the assessment phase, right? After that, you have tools which are going to help you even better, right? So this is really cool to see. But no, I do like this tool, and the cool thing also is that if you have, well, in that case, we are checking customers who are already or sites which are already running on Azure. But if you have sites which have issues, it's also going to propose you some solutions, right? So it's not just telling you, oh, it doesn't work, but we saw before in my screenshots, right, when we had the assessment error here, it's not just going to tell me, hey, that doesn't work, but it's going to tell me, oh, that's how you can fix it, right? So every tool that we have, another tool that I can quickly bring up if you want, because this is here, running with
10 minutes or so.
Yeah, this is here running with with application services. But if you go into data, for example, we have another tool which is the Data Migration Assistant. And the Data Migration Assistant is for SQL Server. So again, right, different tools for different environments. But this is going to also help you to understand, all right, if I have an old SQL Server which is running, SQL Server 2012 or earlier, am I going to be able to bring that to the cloud? And that can be very interesting because we do have, different solutions, right? We can say, I'm going to do the assessment if I go on an Azure SQL database single instance, which is like the simple version of Azure SQL database. But if it doesn't work, and I decide to upgrade to something called managed instance, let's not go into the details, but basically a more powerful, more compatible version of SQL Server, then is it going to work? It's going to be more expensive, but it might work better. So you have really a choice, and that's going to allow you to do also a lot of discovery like that. And eventually, because we have talked for almost an hour about the assessment, which I actually like because this is a phase that people forget, right? They say, hey, let's migrate and let's go.
So important.
It is. But once you have done this assessment, then we also have tools, sometimes the same tools, sometimes different tools to actually do the migration. And the migration happens sometimes, like for example, in the case of the database migration service, which we are using on Azure to do data migration with minimal downtime or no downtime. So you can really say, all right, I'm going to do things very gradually. I'm going to migrate my web application first. I'm going to keep the data on my premises, right? And then I will have some hybrid connection, maybe express route, or maybe a VPN connection, or maybe even a public port, right? Why not? And then once this is done, then you can worry about migrating the data. And all this is going to happen very gradually without really having to worry about downtime. So this is pretty good, actually.
And so I brought up this if anybody is interested. There's a bunch of documentation about here.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, it says right here, it assesses your on-premises SQL instances and makes a decision on how to actually do it. And I think what's really cool here is it shows you, what's going to cause breaking changes, deprecated features. So as you're using older versions of SQL and you want to modernize what you're doing, you'll find that a long way. And we're not just limited to just using tools to migrate SQL. Like you said it before, there are tools, to migrate your Mongo database.
Yep.
You may have MySQL.
We have some really cool stuff in the database migration service, which is the managed service that we use to actually perform the migration. This one is more for assessment, but we have the service where you can migrate, for example, MySQL to a MySQL instance running on Azure database. And so like this, you have MySQL in the cloud, right? We support also PostgreSQL migration. We support MariaDB migration. We even support databases running in AWS. If for some reason you want to get out of AWS into Azure, we have the way to help you do that. So there are really tons of things that you can do here.
Yeah, it's always great to know that there's something that can actually get you through the data moving process. So if you need to move a database, sometimes it's about in the past, moving a database took dumping it, holding and hoping that there were no major
and being offline and having your website offline during that time, right? Which is also a big advantage of the database migration service is that there is also an online mode which allows you to do the migration without having to go offline, which is a huge advantage, right? So you can say, all right, I'm going to migrate my old database into the new one, and then after that, you're going to say when I have so that would be the online migration that is detailed here. When so you do the migration, you don't switch a connection string yet. Your web application is going to continue writing to the old database. The changes are synchronized. So this is the beauty of it, right? Is that the changes are being synchronized. And then once you are ready to switch a connection string, you do that. And then only after that, you basically switch off the database migration service because it is done. This one is another tool which is also interesting. It's also a good point of entry to get guided. And here we see, for example, that there is also some steps to migrate access. Because again, right, we are dealing with stuff that is sometimes, a little bit legacy, etc. So you can actually migrate access to a SQL server and then that to the cloud, for example. So you have different ways to do things.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm going to post this migration guide into the chat as well.
Yeah, this is a good place to start also and to get. And definitely, I would say the first place to start if you want to do migration is really the Azure Migrate portal. So it's if you go to azure.com/migrate, this is where you will go to get everything. You showed that in the beginning, Jay, and then after that you will get really a lot of information. I think we also have. I know that we also have a lot of white papers and advices and how did it go when we did that, etc., etc. So this is a great start.
I think that one of the big things that there's a ton of testimonials from different companies that have used these migration tools to be able to get them over the hump when they really, really needed something different than what they've done. So, what, Laurent, we've talked a lot about migrations, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how you've migrated to the work that you're doing now. You like that transition?
I do.
You and I, we've had to kind of rediscover the work that we do. And I didn't want to do this at the top of the show because I do it a lot at the top of the show. And I wanted to kind of close out this time with a little bit more personal because we spent so much time in the weeds. So first of all, you have you live out in Switzerland. You have a really cool kind of motorcycle and enjoying life, and you're working from home now, like a lot of us.
Yes.
You like myself, you spend a lot of time on the road teaching people how to do these things. And so
Indeed.
how's your new migration?
Yeah, so there were, it was a lot of migrations, right? First of all, the first migration was joining Microsoft. I was a partner for a long time. I was an MVP for a very long time. So I would say I knew Microsoft pretty well, but still, when you start working for them, it's very different. But most importantly, I was a front-end developer, and not even a web application developer like we, usually when people say front-end. I was actually a client application developer doing mostly Windows applications, mobile applications, these kind of things. So really going into Azure was a huge shift. It was a lift and slap my face and then shift, right? It was really a awakening call where suddenly I realized, oh my God, I have literally no idea about what I'm doing. But at the same time, I think the idea of founding our team was, and by the way, that was, I would say 3 and a little bit more than 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, when the kind of like establishment of that whole like cloud advocacy group kind of really happened.
Yeah, pretty much. So I started talking about joining in May, I would say 2017, something like that. So in the beginning of the team, and then I joined in August 17. So that was kind of a big shift for me. But at the same time, I was really happy to do it because I kept hearing people that I really estimate a lot, as an MVP or as a regional director, which is another partner program of Microsoft, kept talking about Azure and how important it is, et cetera, et cetera. And I kept telling myself, at some point, this is a turn in my career that I will have to do if I want to stay relevant. And I'm really happy I did it. I think it was a good choice. Things always happens for a reason, right? It so happens that
even being here where we are right now, I think that's a really good and that leads me to we're working from home. We don't travel anymore, but we do all this stuff here.
I mean, we miss it, but at the same time, we do tons of exciting stuff.
And now
from that, right?
And we're actually meeting people where they are rather than trying to get to where they are.
Correct.
Like meeting people directly in your home, doing AzureFunBytes as a stream every week means that, there's people who I'm going to reach. And then with YouTube and all that other stuff, people are going to keep their eyes open. And so that gives me a lot of good feelings about what we can continue to do. Because we're going to be in a new situation in this world, and a lot of people who want to teach will have to kind of adjust how we do it and where we do it and when we do it.
Yeah, it's a good learning for us as well. You saw how we completely changed, and now we go into the other migration, which is a migration to online from being in person everywhere in the world. But basically, we had to shift build completely to online in a matter of few weeks. Because of the events, right? Build was supposed to be in person, and then we had to actually move it to online. Ignite, I would say, was from early on. It was from the beginning we started working on Ignite. It was clear that it would be an online event. So it was a little bit different. And I think we already saw a lot of improvement between those two editions.
I really enjoyed doing Ignite this year.
Yeah.
I think more than I did going out into, Orlando last year. As much as I enjoy Orlando, and I'll be real, I don't know if I got to reach everybody that I really wanted to in Orlando. And and
there is that,
and the experience that I had this year doing it online, I think was really great. But that kind of leads me into talking about the experience we had today.
Yeah.
And how to wrap it up. Laurent, how can people find you to do what they want to do with the code and everything else that you have and information?
Yeah, so there are really different places where they can go. One place they can go, I do have a blog. I write really not as often as I used to. I used to write very, very often. These days, I do articles when I really have something bigger to show. But if they go to blog.galasoft, galasoft.ch, which is Switzerland, this is where they can find me. And another very good place to go and chat with me is on Twitter. So my Twitter is already on the screen.
Right there.
Right here. All right. Boom. So this is where you can contact me, and my DMs are open, which means that you can always get into my direct messages if you don't want to expose, things that you don't want the public to see. Other than that, what we do a lot on my team, and I know we are at the end almost, but we are going to do a lot of events called Virtual Training Week. So keep an eye or an ear open for that, because this is coming in the beginning of next year and always in a place near you. So the field are going to use the content that we created. And in my case, I was responsible for 5 different sessions which are telling you a story of migration. So it's exactly what we are talking about today, but from A to Z, including also monitoring your application, adding custom domains to your application, etc., etc. So it's really a full story, and that's going to be in the beginning of next year.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being part of this today. I'm going to go ahead and close everything up by saying this was an amazing time, and I really appreciate all the information you gave me today. And I hope we can do this again one day about another subject, okay?
Absolutely.
We'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching me on Azure FunBytes. We'll catch you in another Azure FunByte time and the same Azure FunByte channel. Later.